journalist Alexander Fedorchuk, Zvezda TV channel cameraman Andrei Panov, and the driver of the camera crew. Journalists and their camera crews, how they hit them from all possible types of armaments supplied by the West cannot be described on the recent days following targeted attacks, including through high-precision, long-range armaments. 4 media representatives were killed, 3 besides other civilians were severely wounded on March 24th, as you know, on the territory of the LPR, following a targeted artillery strike. Известия journalist Alexander Fedorchuk, Zvezda TV channel cameraman Andrei Panov, and the driver of the camera crew artillery strike. Известия journalist Alexander Fedorchuk, Zvezda TV channel cameraman Andrei Panov, and the driver of the camera crew on the recent days following targeted attacks, including through high-precision, long-range armaments. 4 media representatives were killed, 3 besides other civilians were severely wounded on March 27th. Precision MLRS armaments. That means that they knew for sure who they're using it against. The Kiev regime ignore the norms of the international law. Relevant international structures continue to ignore this as well, like UNESCO General Director, the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, turning blind eye to this, as well as other multilateral institutions, let alone numerous human rights NGOs, on whose perennial conscious silence and inaction this monster was nurtured. It is them, as one Western guidelines mentions, strategic silence made the criminals on bunker to feel that they are unpunished and can do everything they want. And now this continues to encourage Ukrainian Nazis to commit more crimes. We saw comments, the OSCE commentary. One thing, we were shocked by the phrase that the OSCE, as it said by its representative, is always opposes killings of all journalists. But I have a question. Then why do we need a specialized institution for this? If we can record this phrase one more time, or to put them on a table and put it at the OSCE that this organization is always against the killings of journalists. Probably special representatives shouldn't be paid for this. Probably conferences are not needed for this. There have been thousands of them. Probably we don't need expansive apparatus of these officials of the OSCE. Accounts on the internet are not needed. Probably they shouldn't go around and teach others how to live. If one phrase is enough as a logo, or to put it on a screen, if countries pay for this organization, then please notice who launched strikes and who is to be to blame. The UN, with headquarters at the UN, said that they did not have special mandate to investigate. You don't have a mandate, but then how do you investigate without mandate any other or all other cases when you find words to accuse our country? Then remember that you don't have mandate for this. To identify that the Kiev regime is happy to kill Russian journalists. You don't need mandate. You just have to read their quotes. You don't need mandate for this because the resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council state that it is unacceptable to kill civilians and journalists. Yet again, our delegation, our permanent mission to the UN forces, on the territory of the LPR, following a targeted artillery strike. Известия, journalist Alexander Fedorchuk, Zvezda TV channel, cameraman Andrei Panov, and the driver of the camera crew, journalists and their camera crews, how they hit them from all possible types of armaments supplied by the West cannot be described. On the recent days, and hateful ideology, detailed information about crimes of the Banderovics is collected and structured by the International Public Tribunal. Journalists and their camera crews, how they hit them from all possible types of armaments supplied by the West cannot be described. On the recent days following targeted attacks, including through high precision, long range armaments, 4 media representatives were killed, 3 besides other civilians were severely wounded on March 24th, as you know, on the territory of the LPR, following a targeted artillery strike. They abused people in ways that we are afraid even to talk about. They were tortured with electricity, beaten up with metal tubes, ropes, sticks, hammers, bats. In hospitals, they were cut off without painkillers. The supporters of the Nazi doctor and sadist Joseph Mengele won't go away with it and will be punished, as all the spokesperson of international institutions turn a blind eye on this. According to the data of the Investigative Committee of Russia in the Kursk region since 2022 up to now, following the crimes of the Ukrainian armed army, 167 people, civilians were killed, 500 wounded, 43,000 people were recognized as affected. Thousands of facilities of civil infrastructure were destroyed. There's a practice to give permits to residents of Suja to go around the city. If people do not have them, they were taken to garrison headquarters, they were questioned. The Ukrainian army organized looting raids from the Suma region only last week. According to the ambassador at large of Russian MFA, Rodin Miroshnik, 16 civilians were killed, 133 wounded, including 4 minors. The Kiev regime continues to strike on energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation. On March 25th, 27th, there were attacks of drone attacks on energy facilities on the territories of Bryansk and Kursk regions, strike on gas storage tank in Crimea was thwarted, and Zelensky publicly said that he agrees to the agreements reached in Riyadh on March 24th between Russia and the US to cease strikes on the civil infrastructure. Now about punishments to the criminals. The Russian courts continue to pronounce verdicts to the Ukrainian criminals. The Investigative Committee of Russia launched 736 criminal cases. 46 Ukrainian soldiers were given long sentences. 92 cases are considered by courts. 58 people are under investigation. In Absentia, foreign mercenaries, British guard Christopher was given 14 and a half years in prison. Georgians Alexei Bibichadze, Mikhail Kamkadze, Nadim Khalamadze were given 25, 23, and 14 years in prison, respectively. Now about those who sponsor all of this. The meeting of the EU leaders on March 2021 in Brussels predictably failed. It was centered around the initiative of the leader of the European so-called diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, about a new tranche of military support to Ukraine worth 40 billion euros. This sum is devoid from reality and caused resistance from a number of member states. And all of this, despite despite the fact that they welcomed Zelensky, they even reduced the volume of support to 5 billion euros, but it didn't work out. Additional 2 million artillery shells to Kiev also wasn't agreed upon, so no certain commitments to military support Ukraine wasn't adopted. The European bureaucracy isn't ensured by real possibilities of the member state, because it's clear that the resources of the European countries are far from endless. To fuel Kiev does not only mean to waste money. It's not only the fight against until the last Ukrainian, but it is the building up a threat at their own backyards. Now, when British outlets started to write about it, the Times write that uncontrolled arms in circulation in Ukraine, and the precise number is unknown even to Washington, is becoming a security problem. Journalists come to a conclusion that in some time, hundreds of thousands of armaments will end up not only in Africa and in the Middle East, but also in Europe. Will help the British journalist. This armament is already in the western part of the European continent, and we gave many examples when military products ended up in the hands of groups in Asia and Africa. And now Zelensky clients and the black market also include drug cartels in Latin America. According to the Mexican media, fighters of Cartel Golfo received Javelin American anti-tank complexes. They were supplied to Kiev earlier. It is known that the terrorists who killed on March 21st 44 people in southwest of Niger used howitzers M120.
And now let's talk about the so-called peace mission, but it's about military intervention. London and Paris continue to make plans about military intervention in Ukraine. It is disguised as the so-called peacekeeping mission on March 21st in Northwood at the initiative of the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in hybrid form, where there was a meeting of military brass of 30 countries for which had quite an interesting name, Coalition of the Willing. These countries are ready to send their troops to Ukraine. This topic will continue today in Paris at the leaders level. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that our country stands categorically against this scenario that is fraught with a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. It is noteworthy that the British are well aware of the dangerous games that they are playing. That's why they're cowardly proposing an idea to depersonify the uniform of peacekeepers, which implies the absence of any sleeve patches of insignia. It would be far more difficult to identify them, and we understand why they're doing that. Great Britain left the EU, and once they have collapsed the European economy, they want to collapse the entire European continent, and they later are going to join the Anglo-Saxon alliance. And now I will say a few words about mobilization novelties of the Kiev regime. It continues to obediently send Ukrainian young citizens at the age of 18 and 24 who signed the so-called Millions contract. All the 17 brigades that they chose from are operating on the front line, which means that the tragic outcome is inevitable. According to Ukrainian Telegram channels, new mobilization novelties are being developed. They're discussing an initiative to change the mobilization age. It will be from 20 to 55, which will replace the existing 25 and 60. Let's look in greater detail at that. They plan to lower the mobilization age by 5 years, so the Ukrainian men will be drafted at the age of 20, and it's real to implement in Ukraine. And why are they lowering the upper limit of the mobilization age from 60 to 55? Because there are fewer senior people who are ready to carry out military service in Ukraine. The Kiev establishment has shown its interest in continuing military activities because they view it as a source of its existence. They are just devouring Ukrainian citizens. In parallel, Zelensky regime is gradually implementing the misanthropic belief of the American geostrategist and Russophobe Zbigniew Brzezinski, who said, and I quote, that in 2030s, he wrote that no more 20 million people should stay in Ukraine in 2030s. And also a few words about the preparations of the Ukrainian establishment to retain power by force. Well, it seems that they feel the growing public frustration, and they realize that the retribution for the crimes against their own citizens is inevitable, and they have lost their legitimacy, and they are preparing for retaining power by force. That explains why the Committee of the Ukrainian Rada on Law Enforcement Activities has approved the legislation of number 10311, which allows the National Guard to use firearms, tear gas, and UAVs against civilians during mass riots. It seems that the Kiev regime is planning a scenario which is far worse than the shootings by snipers at the Maidan Square. Where is the Council of Europe? Where are the declarations and resolutions? Are they going to establish a special committee of the Council of Europe of what the Kiev regime is doing against its own civilians, UAVs, firearms, and tear gas? They continue to fight historical memory there. In Dnipropetrovsk, local authorities, with the support of radical nationalists, removed a memorial plate from the monument to the heroes of the Kaidak anti-fascist underground movement in Poltava. They have removed a memorial plate in Ukrainian that was devoted to volunteers who went to war with Nazism, and it was removed from the school number 39. And they cannot present it as fighting the Russian language or diversification policy that they have made a part of their state policy. That's real neo-Nazism that we see here. These facts once again confirm that the special military operation is relevant, particularly its tasks to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, as well as to address the threats emanating from its territory. And as our leadership has stated many times, all these goals will be achieved. And a fantastic statement that Zelensky made to the TV channel, just to let us remember his conversation with the American president. Zelensky said, if you can make Putin to stop war, that would be great, but he can cheat. He deceived me already after the Minsk ceasefire. And all Western media started to print that as the quote, but they didn't remember, they didn't remind it to their audience, to their readers, of what their leaders, Merkel and Hollande, deceived Ukrainian citizens and the entire international community by not implementing the Minsk agreements, because they knew from the very beginning that they wouldn't implement these documents. We have been regularly saying at our briefings that the West has always been behind the collapse of all peace initiatives in Ukraine, starting from the violent coup d'etat in February 2014. And after that, for a long period of time, in their remarks, the country guarantors of the Minsk agreements, Germany and France in particular, have expressed their commitment to peace, but the time has passed, administrations changed in these countries, and former leaders didn't hold back anymore. On December 7th, 2022, the former Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, who was in power for more than 16 years, who likes to talk about democratic processes in the West, by the way, and she was directly involved in the Normandy format meetings and in the development of the Minsk agreements. In her interview to the German mass media, she was quite sincere, and I quote, "The Minsk agreements," Merkel said, "were an attempt to give time to Ukraine. It also used this time to become stronger, as can be seen today. The Ukraine of 2014 and 2015 is not the modern Ukraine. I doubt," she added, "that NATO countries would be able to do as much as they are able to do today to help Ukraine." It was clear to all of us that it is a frozen conflict and the problem is not resolved. That's what bought this so much precious time for Ukraine, Merkel said. Zelensky said that he was deceived, but he didn't say who deceived him in particular. Another guarantor, former French President François Hollande, supported President and said that Merkel was right on point when she said that. He said, and I quote, the fuss, he said, around the Minsk agreements he's referring to the Normandy format meetings, the UN Security Council resolutions, endless efforts of special representatives on the implementation and monitoring of implementation of the Minsk agreements. And he called it fuss around the Minsk agreements has resulted in the situation that since 2014, Ukraine has strengthened its military posture. It became better, and the merit of the Minsk agreement is that the Kiev has acquired time to strengthen its army, because in 2014, not NATO couldn't provide Kiev with weapons at the volume that it is doing today, and it stopped the Russian offensive for a while. End of quote. That's what the former French president said. The guarantor of the Minsk agreements is just a memoir for them. And it's not just a confession or a memoir. They are admitting their guilt, but they don't repent. At that time, in 2015, when there were hours of negotiations, they knew from the very beginning that they wouldn't implement anything. They will continue to provide the Kiev regime with weapons. But they forget to say another important thing. At that time and today, they understood and they understand that the Kiev regime is doomed. And they didn't feel bad for anyone, for women, for children, for the civil population of the Donbass or Ukraine in general. They just needed the conflict. And after that, if someone said that Russia is to blame for something and to shift the blame on Russia, because this is the same very leaders who were part of the so-called Normandy format, and they managed directly numerous political processes, including a change of power in Ukraine. What's important about this compassion that it was Western falsification. They were toying with the use of international law and pursued the only goal, which is to pump the Kiev regime with weapons and to politically prepare to the situation when hostilities started that we saw in the beginning of 2022 when the Kiev regime started the escalation in the Donbass. Remember what we talked about today. They want to put the western part of Europe on fire. From their point of view, the international agreements has drawn the attention of international community away from the real situation in Ukraine, from the humanitarian catastrophe and endless killings that resulted in a lot of casualties on both sides. Experts say that at least 13,000 people died on both sides. That was the result of the Western manipulations with the Minsk agreements. Our country has no other choice. We recognized those territories as sovereign. Later, they were added to the Russian Federation so that we could save citizens of those territories, so that we could protect their dignity. The main goal of this huge provocation was to create a flashpoint in this region, in the border of the Russian Federation, and later a legitimate coup d'etat happened, despite the fact that the Ukrainian people made their own choice that it needed. The West ousted the legitimately elected presidents and brought to power their puppets, Viktor Yushchenko, Petro Poroshenko, and the violent Zelensky who sits in the bunker. That's how they've been preparing for a greater conflict. Let us recall what another signatory said about the Minsk agreements, then President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. The former president stated to the British TV channel BBC in the documentary, and I quote, "Do you know what the success of the Minsk agreements is, even though Russia has not implemented any of their points?" Poroshenko said. This document, Poroshenko said, gave Ukraine 8 years to build an army, an economy, and a global pro-Ukrainian anti-Putin coalition, end of quote. Do you think it happened in the distant past and everyone has forgotten? Well, it's not the case. Today, in the Western mass media, is speeding actively this news, but from their own logic, and they have turned everything upside down. All these quotes are being fit into the text, and Zelensky comes to the fore, and other representatives of the office of the Ukrainian president or Western regimes, and they speak about the fact that the Minsk agreements were not fulfilled, and they blame Russia for that. At the press conference Ukraine 2024, Zelensky told that the Russian president, and I quote, has constantly raised the issue of ceasefire in the Donbass during his personal meeting in 2019. Zelensky warned the Russian president that the Minsk agreements won't work due to the alleged futility of the idea to withdraw forces from the line of contact. And when they asked Zelensky about the details of that meeting, he replied that he didn't remember the details. Well, it happened in another life. The direct quote, but what an interesting excuse, isn't it? Let's go back a year earlier, in 2023, in the interview to the German media outlet Spiegel. Zelensky added more details. I haven't seen, Zelensky said, in the Minsk agreements a wish to preserve the independence of Ukraine. I understand the point of view of the Western countries. First and foremost, they wanted to satisfy the Russian appetites at the expense of Ukraine. Delays is a normal thing in diplomacy because you doesn't know when a person making decisions would die, and everything would be easier, much easier. Is it okay that the Ukrainian president spoke about that in that way? Zelensky said, I contacted Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, and I told them that the Minsk agreements cannot be implemented by Ukraine. Zelensky said, I jumped into the train, which, to be honest, has been moving to the abyss. And by the abyss, I meant the agreements per se, because each clause is a wagon, and once you're trying to deconstruct it, you understand that everything is organized in such a way that one party cannot implement something and another party freezes the conflict. And there are so many statements like that. I'll just give you another quote in support of what I've just said. We don't need military people with foreign flags in our territory. We are not asking for that. Otherwise, it will cause destabilization all around the world. We don't want to give another pretext for Russia to say that Ukraine has military bases and that Russia should protect itself from it. You know who said that? Zelensky in February 2022. Again, going back to the question of peacekeeping missions that are being discussed by the Western countries. Another topic, Bucha, another Western manipulation. I've explained to you how they manipulated with the Minsk agreements, and now let's talk about how they manipulated with the situation in Bucha. At the previous briefing on March 13th, we told you that April 3rd will mark 3 years since the Zelensky regime and its Western handlers staged a bloody provocation in Bucha, the Kiev region. You probably remember that the world saw evidence of the alleged killings of innocent people. The objective was to besmirch the Russian armed forces in the eyes of the international public opinion, and they did that to undermine peace talks. The fake nature of this hastily made provocation was visible to the naked eye. The Western propaganda machine was at full capacity, and it started to spin the news item about it, and the Western countries have been promoting their lies with great energy.
Цель кампании.
Those pseudo witnesses and the main aim of the campaign. It was clear it was a campaign of the war party that needed to torpedo the understandings reached at the time during the Istanbul talks aimed at a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. Russia has repeatedly provided recent refutations of the numerous fakes about Bucha. During the period when this village was under the control of the Russian military, the civilian population was able to move freely around it, and civilians used mobile communications, received humanitarian aid. Our units left Bucha on the 30th of March 2022. This was confirmed by the mayor of the town, Anatoly Fedoruk, who on the 31st of March, in a video message, stated there were no Russian armed forces in the village. And there was no mention about the victims of mass shootings in the streets, whom he could not fail to notice. It was only after the Ukrainian armed forces, accompanied by foreign journalists, entered the village, the so-called irrefutable evidence of crimes in Bucha, it was actually a bloody staging by the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. The organizers of this staging, of course, do their best in order for no objective investigation to be held. They dismiss this argument, they continue to lie, they do their best in order not to reply to the obvious question, where is the list of victims, what are their names, who are those people? We understand that the Ukrainian militants will not reveal their own atrocities, because otherwise this house of cards, it will just break. Russia does its best in order to identify the true perpetrators, to bring them to justice. We make efforts to obtain assistance from the United Nations, and we have addressed the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We have sent requests in order to publish requests. Bodies found in Bucha, actually they were lying there. Who do they mean? They were shown by the Western media. These questions, of course, remain unanswered. These questions have been asked to Guterres by Sergei Lavrov several times, and there was no reply. In September 2024, through the Russian Permanent Mission in New York, we submitted to the United Nations Secretariat a request prepared by the Investigative Committee together with the Prosecutor General's Office. A request to investigate the circumstances of the provocation in Bucha, but there was no substantive response. Such actions testify that the initiators of the staging in Bucha are, of course, the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. They have something to hide. The functionaries of international organizations who have taken unequivocally pro-Ukrainian positions, they do not shy of covering up their criminal acts. We know about the preparation of the so-called international conference on Bucha in May this year, with the assistance of the United Kingdom. There is no doubt this provocation will become yet another step to pull old manuals out of dusty cupboards and attempt to present in a new wrapper the fakes about the alleged involvement of the Russian armed forces in this staging in Bucha. The aim is the same. Many politicians speak about peace now. We know this scenario. As soon as talks about peace start, we need to wait provocations by the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. All these talks, they will just need to be obstructed. That's why those conferences are held. And a very interesting issue, we have drawn attention to statements in the National Assembly of France by Minister for Overseas Territories Manuel Valls on the construction of yet a second French military base on the island of Mayotte. The territoriality of this island has been enshrined in the UN General Assembly Resolutions 3385 and Resolution 2469. Russia is against militarization of any territories that causes threats for security of certain regions. It's also concerning the Indian Ocean territory. The military base on the island of Mayotte that already exists in the settlement of Saudi that is aimed not only against external threats, as Paris tries to convince everyone, but to control the overseas territories. It's one of the remnants of colonial epoch. And we remember the Operation Van Busche in 2023. It was forcible eviction of Comorians by the French authorities, whom they consider as illegal migrants. And that resulted in a humanitarian crisis in the archipelago. We consider that it is a relapse of neo-colonial instincts of Paris and a clear demonstration of its lack of desire to respect the territorial integrity of the Comorian Islands and its selective approach to the UN General Assembly resolutions. Regarding the historical memory, in the Netherlands, the city of Leusden, on the territory of the Memorial Cemetery, the Soviet Field of Glory, where 865 Red Army soldiers are buried. This project, implemented for 5 years, it was a common effort of Russia, the Netherlands, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan to commemorate the victims of Nazism. The museum represents the testimonies of victims of the atrocities by Nazis in the Netherlands, atrocities against Soviet prisoners of war. There is evidence by one of the prisoners of the Nazi concentration camps. The main creator was Remco Reding, a journalist and public activist, head of the Soviet Field of Glory Fund. He improves the territory of the cemetery, and in Russia and other CIS countries, the relatives have been traced, relatives of those buried in the cemetery. We would like to express our gratitude to those who participate in this noble and very important project. It was on the eve of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. It's significant. I would like to underline that despite many unsuccessful efforts by some forces in the West in order to keep silence, to denigrate the role of the Soviet Union in the victory over Nazism, there are still people in the Kingdom of the Netherlands who honor the feat of the Soviet heroes and understand that it is very important to preserve the historical memory about the role of our country in the defeat of Nazi Germany. The testimony of that are warm words of the visitors of the museum, deeply impressed by the tragic personal stories of Soviet soldiers who gave their lives to liberate Europe from the brown plague. One more issue, humanitarian aid to Islamabad for the population of Pakistan. With the help of the Red Crescent Society, the cargo will be transferred to those in need. Russian-Pakistani cooperation in humanitarian sphere will be continued further. Tomorrow, on the 28th of March, ESCAP marks its 78th anniversary from its creation. The decision was taken during the UN Economic and Social Council meeting in 1947. ESCAP has approved collective approaches for the development of Asia-Pacific region. Russia has been a member since 1995, sub-regional, and since 1995 regional member, and included participating in many areas of its activities: energy, transport, trade, environment, and many other topics. Our experts participated in the elaboration of intergovernmental agreement on dry ports of international importance, ESCAP framework agreement of facilitation of cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific of 2016, trilateral Russia-Mongolia-China intergovernmental agreement on international road transport along the Asian highway network of 2016. ESCAP has become a reliable partner for our country in providing technical assistance, including Central Asia and West Caucasia. We value the Commission's assistance in developing our competence in the social economic areas. We intend to continue to provide political experts and financial support to ESCAP. Another important international event yesterday in Murmansk, International Forum, the Arctic Territory of Dialogue, started its work. Its motto is Live in the North. It is held since 2010. It's a major platform for discussion of the relevant problems and perspectives of the Arctic region with foreign partners. It will include 20 sessions, perspectives of the development of the Northern Sea route will be discussed, support of business in the Arctic, the development of northern cities, HR projects, environment, and new national projects. Experts and scientists will discuss in a comprehensive way the possibilities of establishing security and cooperation in the region, exchange views on the prospects of the implementation of cultural and scientific projects. It reflects one of our key priorities in development of Arctic territories: comprehensive renewal, improvement of cities, villages, creation of modern new workplaces, year-round navigation on the Northern Sea route. I would remind, it's well known, but the Russian Arctic, it has a lot of opportunities for creative work to engage the forces and the talents of young people, of representatives of different jobs, creative scientific initiatives, and in this large-scale work, we are interested in cooperation with all partners and integration association. The cultural program of the forum covers the major role of the regions in our country and modern tendencies and the image of the future of the extreme north. Much attention has been paid to indigenous people, their culture, their traditions. The gastronomical festival, the Taste of the Arctics, the team of restaurateur and chefs will present regional cuisine. It's just very tasty, even tasty to speak about that. The projects of northern seas, products of local products will be tasted there. And at the festival, there will be a 25-meter tunnel with ice engravings dedicated to the 500th anniversary of the development of the Northern Sea route. One more important date this year, as you know, it's the centenary of ARTEC. We talk about that a lot. We post a lot of materials on the ministry website and on social media, our social media. This solemn Many events will be held year-round, but of course, the main festivities are planned for June, the date itself, the date of the centenary. Artek is a major children's center in the world. Its territory is 218 hectares. More than 40,000 children from Russia and from abroad participate. It's just development of their personalities, their talents. It's the true capital of the country of childhood that lives a very bright, very intensive life year-round. In this jubilee of Artek, every shift creates all the conditions for future generations for their development. As well as there will be many areas like the 80th anniversary of a great victory, the center of Artek, the project Our Heroes, the movement of the first. It will be aimed at civic duty, patriotism, respect for elders, and strengthening traditional, spiritual, and moral values. Artek participates in national projects in the sphere of education, culture, digital economy, promotes its unique experience. In the regions, the center has had a very strong international component. Artek continues its development. Such new areas are formed. It's not new actually, but it has not been long the center of children diplomacy. More than 10,000 people from 105 countries in the world. It's very pleasant. I'm very glad about that. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2016 participated actively in the life of Artek that year. I remember back then we had star counselors. We came there with foreign journalists, created a press tour. We were counselors in Krustalny unit specialized in journalism. It was a fantastic experience for the young people and for us as well. It was a true unification. The 100 history of Artek, it's not only about education sphere, it's about heroism, it's about bravery. During the years of the Second World War, Artek underwent occupation. It was 2 years and a half. On the 15th of April 1945, Artek was liberated by the fighters of the Separate Coastal Army. After that, it was restored. In August 1944, Artek was attended by 400 children of the Crimean partisans. In May 1985, a monument to the liberators of Artek was opened in order to honor the 40th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War. I think Artek was not only restored back then after the Second World War, its condition. The condition it suffered after reunification with Russia. But Russian experts, teachers, it was just very impressive. When we came there in 2016, we were just so impressed. And to say we were shocked is just to say nothing. After we saw the photos, it was just 1 year and a half. It's just regained its true shape, because with the Kiev regime that was back then still trying to associate itself with some democratic processes, under the Kiev regime, this camp, it was just anything but a children educational upbringing center for recreation and for education. It was anything but that. Restaurants, something for adults, hotels. It was just a public place. It was not sports facilities. Just empty areas. Or some areas where rubbish was stored. It was just joint work of the state, of business, of public figures. Artek is just started to live again, started to live fully, and started to operate fully. And during those festivities, this jubilee, the Open Text Publishing House published a book, Artek 400. It's a history of every Artek shift. Just imagine 1925 till 2025. It was former Artek counselor. She worked there in 1970s. Now she's PhD in philosophy, associate professor at the Moscow Pedagogical State, Nadezhda Prodina. The book contains important historical documents about its creation. Camp on the shore of the Black Sea became popular among children from all over the world, children diplomacy developing, and the true friendship of Artek children they kept for their entire life. This book is a memory of the true epoch, a window to the world of the childhood, friendship, and it's just discoveries for the young generation.
Since 1925, it has information about sessions with statistics of the number of children who came there, with the number of events who took place there every year. It's a huge work accompanied by a lot of photos and documents that helps the reader see the life history of this place. This book was made with the use of modern technologies, so you can use QR codes to listen to Artek songs and to watch documentaries about Artek. It's a unique book, and I invite you to have a look at it. Artek approaches its anniversary with a fantastic work. They do not only conduct events, but they also have such things about its history. I'm prepared to answer questions. Is International Affairs with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Recently, editor-in-chief of the Italian International Reporters, Andrea Lucidi, who regularly tells in his articles the truth about situation in Donbass, wasn't let out of Estonia to come back to Russia. How can you comment on this, given the fact that the Estonian authorities are anti-Russian? That would be surprising if the Estonian authorities would act otherwise. Did you expect anything else from them? Indeed, the editor-in-chief of International Reporters, Andrea Lucidi, is considered to be an enemy of all neo-Nazi and Russophobe regimes. He is well known for his criticism of neo-Nazism. He is well known regarding this in the Baltic state. He was not let out of Estonia to come back to Russia. He regularly works on the permanent basis in our country and has been covering the special military operation. In November 2024, he addressed President Putin with a request to grant him citizenship because in Italy he was persecuted, and on January 29th he became a full-fledged citizen of our country. On March 18th, the Estonian border soldiers arrested him under the pretense that he takes illegally to Russia money and drones. They were not even ashamed that all these things were with him when he entered Estonia. But Estonian authorities has to feel shame in its fullest. These actions are guided by the aspiration of the Estonian authorities to make their life more complicated for those who has other point of view on international affairs. And essentially, I have an impression that they start a hunt against anti-fascists. Estonia got used to, I'm not talking about ordinary people, but about the regime, got used to that the ideological opponents not shouldn't be talked with. They have a behavior to resort to dirty methods, from smaller deeds to criminal persecution, illegal persecution, and the Estonian authorities consider all Russian-speaking people as such, and everyone who has Russian passports. This is not the first time that the Estonian authorities and authorities of our Baltic states impedes Russian to come back to Russia. This is discrimination. This is blatant Russophobia. This is the manifestation of neo-Nazism. And what is neo-Nazism? It's not what happened in 1930s, 1940s. It is a philosophy, a certain philosophy promoting hatred against peoples and countries. All of this is of nationalist character. And officials are involved in this. Given the persecution of our citizens, we see violation of freedom of speech and now even freedom of movement. Unlike the EU, we adhere to freedom of speech. Russia is ascribed some terrible things with foreign journalists, but journalists have an opportunity to work in our country in line with the legislation of our country and to fulfill their duty. They are granted visas, accreditations, they're invited for events, even more. They can work fully without hindrance at the events, not like in Great Britain. They invite journalists, but they did not let journalists to attend the event because they didn't have suitable footwear, for example. I saw that today we accredited media from various countries, including unfriendly countries. We answer written requests. No one avoids the contacts with journalists, but when the rules of accreditation are violated, when the legislation is violated, we always say this. Even when we respond to something, we say that it's only as a response. This is one more manifestation of neo-Nazism, nationalism, Russophobia from the Estonian regime. Thank you very much. Is Sinhua with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova. We have the following question for you today. In the recent years, China has been streamlining its visa policy. For example, in December 2024, the Chinese authorities announced that they're going to ease the policy of visa-free transit, and tourists can come to the country up to 240 hours from 54 foreign states. This applies to Russia as well. In your opinion, what opportunities will such policy give to movements of people from various countries, including between China and Russia. How can you comment on the current state and prospects of humanitarian exchanges between our countries, including in tourism? Thank you. Can I ask your name, please? My name is Yuli. I have a request to the Xinhua agency. Can you please publish an article that this journalist won the heart of a Russian MFA spokesperson? Thank you very much for your fluency in Russia. Thank you for your respectful attitude to the Russian language. I'm really happy when people who only study the Russian language and who are fluent in it. Thank you very much. Now to your question. Russia-China cooperation in the humanitarian sphere is an important part of comprehensive set of bilateral relations. We confirm and we see its development on all the tracks. There's more educational exchanges, ties between institutions. The tourism is growing. Last year, our country received more than 1.2 million Chinese tourists. China received more than 1.5 million Russian citizens. According to the decision of President Vladimir Putin and China's President Xi Jinping in 2024 were declared years of cultures of the countries. The program cannot but touch everyone. It gains wide response among the public, both in Russia and China. We managed, thanks to this action, to build up exchanges, cultural exchanges. This will help maintain friendly people-to-people contacts between our countries, to preserve and to develop relations between new generations. They are important tasks, facilitating to strengthening of social foundation of Russia-China relations and better understanding between people. Of course, it's of huge importance. That is why they work to create comfortable conditions for mutual travel is important. It is always in the focus of relevant agencies of both countries. We are going to continue doing so. Thank you. Thanks to you. Is the Media China Group with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have a question about Russia, US, and Ukraine-US negotiations. How can you evaluate the progress during these negotiations? What are the difficulties? Is Russia going to consider the change of format of negotiations, including wider participation for multilateral dialogue? We have a lot of questions regarding this, and I was surprised by this because the administration of President gave very detailed explanations, and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov, during his interview to Channel One, talked for 15 minutes straight about it. And the negotiators gave commentaries. This topic was covered very in great detail. So I'm prepared to continue answering these type of questions. But I'll tell you one more time, on March 24, there were consultations in Riyadh between the US and Russia. The Russian side was represented by Mr. Karasin and advisor Sergei Beseda. They talked about the grain initiative. An important outcome was that the US committed to help the agricultural and grain to end up on the international markets, wider access of Russian ships and vessels to international ports, and payments. We are grateful for this. We expect that sanction restrictions will be lifted from Bank and other financial organizations that ensure operations in international trade in fertilizers. Now, we expect them to be put on the SWIFT system again. After all these actions are taken, we will be able to reach security agreements in the Black Sea, non-use of violence, and no use of vessels for military purposes. To do so, such vessels will be checked. It is important to ensure security guarantees to cover the Crimean facilities, including the Kerch Bridge and the country. The president reconfirmed the agreement between the presidents to cease strikes on energy infrastructure. There is a list of facilities that are considered as energy infrastructure. We hope that all the agreements will be fulfilled, and thanks to the US, the Russian agricultural export will be unlocked. I can also say that the expert consultations or expert delegations will be continued. Thank you very much. Thanks to you. I hope that I answered you in great detail. If you have any more questions, so I can give you the answers. Is the Rata agency with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. We are here. We have a couple of questions about Russia-China, or Russia-US relations, and the green initiative that you commented on in great detail just now. As to Russia and the US, within the contacts, did Russia receive any positive signals from Washington in terms of an agreement of reduction of strategic arms that can substitute the New START treaty that is expiring next year? Right now, I remember I answered you once. For now, I have nothing to add to my previous answer. Probably it's worth asking this to our counterparts from State Department, because I see you're interested in the US position. Probably they would be more equipped to answer to your question. We don't have any news regarding this. Thank you. Question 2, or part of it, because you named Russia's requirements to renew this initiative. the things that were discussed in Riyadh about agricultural products. It is going to be a new agreement, or is it going to be a prolongation of memorandum that expires in July this year? These are questions that are being discussed right now. Thank you. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes. Good afternoon. We have two questions today. First, Armenia is set to activize its work in international organizations. Probably they want to balance geopolitical risks after the change of administration in the US. What are the relations between Russia and Yerevan?
Well, that's quite an interesting and strange question. What are you talking about, to be exact? Because if you have specific details, it would be easier for me to understand what you are asking about. Because overall, talking about our bilateral relations, we continue to develop a multifaceted political dialogue. Leaders of the two countries are staying in contact. Nikol Pashinyan has accepted the invitation to visit Moscow to take part in the events on the 80th anniversary of the victory. And that they've stated that recently there have been constructive negotiations between the ministers of foreign affairs, and recently there were substantive consultations between deputy heads of Russian and Armenian foreign ministries. Russia and Armenia have intergovernmental and interparliamentary mechanisms. So there is an active interagency cooperation. There was a roundtable on the issue of agro-industrial complex that is being organized by the Chamber of Industry and Commerce of Russia and Russia-Armenian Business Council. There are some initiatives in the Cultural Humanitarian Educational Center, and the Armenian delegation is going to pay a visit to the Educational Center Sirius, which is going to accelerate the opening in Jermuk of the Russian Educational Center for gifted children. We are developing economic ties as well. Our bilateral trade has reached a record high and was estimated at $12 billion. And the relevant economic agencies are developing measures to sustainably increase investment cooperation between our countries. And I believe that Yerevan feel the practical output from their cooperation in the Eurasian integration project, and realize its significance for the social and economic stability and security of their country. We are working together at other international venues, at the United Nations in particular. Our approaches on global agenda are similar or converge. Yerevan traditionally supports and co-sponsors the majority of Russian resolutions that pertain to countering glorification of Nazism. There is still potential for our work. There are some moments in our work that are not yet resolved or not addressed, that should be adjusted, though that these moments wouldn't damage bilateral relations. Not talking about bilateral relations from the point of view of the political science, but relations between peoples, business structures, and peoples of Russia and Armenia. That's why we're discussing these questions, and I hope that we'll make progress in addressing them. Thank you. And I have a second question for you. Biden administration tried to censor information from Russia and Russian opinions on what's going on in the world. No. The Biden administration destroyed, as you said, Russian sources of information. They blocked, they destroyed Russian sources of information. They deleted the personal accounts of Russian journalists in Western social media. They demolished all of that. It's still difficult for Russian journalists to get American visas to work there. It's difficult even for them to get visas to go to the United States for a short-term period. They have bullied Russian journalists, and you are saying that they censored them. Well, censorship, it is when they are trying to remove or to delete some elements of information, when they are trying to play it down, to add some other information, to add some comments to the publication. But they have actually been destroying everything that is connected to Russia. And they have publicly stated that as an element of their policy. The Biden administration has accused the Russian media space of orchestrating changes in the political life of the United States. It was real bullying of Russian journalists with offensive operations, I would say, were organized against the Russian citizens and the Russian journalists. Please don't downplay it. And I'm talking about what the United States did on their own territory, let alone what they did in other countries when they used various mechanisms and made political regimes of some countries to take anti-Russian steps in the media sphere. Yes, that's what I was referring to, but Donald Trump promised to restore the freedom of speech in the US, but the representative of the US State Department stated that the US are not going to stop efforts to fight the Russian media, including Sputnik RT. What's your stance on that? We regret their position. We will help and support our journalists in their work, and we have legitimate rights for that because they're enshrined in international law, and these provisions are also enshrined in the American law. Unacceptability of censorship, upholding freedom of speech, these are the principles that we stick to. If journalists don't violate the national law, no obstacles should be put to their work. Thank you. Thank you. News.ru, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Hello. News.ru, Mikhail Rosen. We have 2 questions. Several Russian journalists were killed or wounded as a result of the Ukrainian attacks. And in summer last year, when the reporter of our media outlet, Nikita Tsitsagi, was killed as a result of that attack, and you called on international organizations, including UNESCO, to condemn the actions of Kiev. Was your appeal successful? Have you received any response from UNESCO? But there are more victims, and is there any hope that international institutions will stop their silence? Mr. Lavrov has provided quite sincere assessments on the actions of Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay. He stated that she is involved in the killings of journalists because she does not deliver on her mandate, and she is an accomplice in the information war against our country and the war against the truth. Every day, we are trying to get the response of UNESCO and some other relevant institutions in the United Nations and OSCE. We're trying to make the international community aware of the situation so that we wouldn't let Western-oriented international officials to put it under the rug, to give meaningless and empty comments about it. And we are helped by many media outlets who realized that it's not a problem of their colleagues, but it's a common problem that affects everyone. This Union of the Journalists of Russia, regional associations of journalists have joined this work. And under this truly public pressure of international scale, Director General makes comments, and after our constant reminders that it is unacceptable to sabotage the mandate, Azule condemned the killing of your colleague, journalist Nikita Tsitsagin, cameraman Valery Kozhin. However, she made unacceptable comments because she said that they were killed at a areas temporarily occupied by the Russian forces. But it should be mentioned that the issues of the security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity fall beyond the scope of UNESCO, but she decided to speak about it and make comments, but nonetheless, she condemned the killing of Russian journalists, the killing of your colleague. At the same time, we noted that the statement of the Director General of UNESCO makes a sporadic statements, and it is not normal to work like that, take into account that she is the Director General and that she works in the UNESCO Secretariat. When they wake up, I don't mean that they sleep. Actually, it means that they are waiting and they believe that they can keep silence for a moment. And under the pressure of Western and Russophobic figures, they cannot fulfill their obligations, but we won't let that happen. I cannot say that the situation is being properly managed by UNESCO, but we'll do our best. Audrey Azoulay has demonstrated its biased nature when she published a report on security and safety of journalists, where no word has been said about the killings of Russian journalists that were killed by the Kiev regime. At that time, report has caused an outrage all over the globe. Numerous appeals were made to Azoulay. Many media outlets and organizations appealed to her. Russia and many other countries have condemned the biased work of the international official at the 34th Intergovernmental Board of the International Program for the Development of Communications in November-December in Paris. And we have required explanations from the UNESCO Secretariat about the methodology of collecting data on the killings of journalists. And it has provided quite dubious explanations, so according to which such methodology was not discussed with member states, and it was approved by the Secretariat in a secret way, and we are not okay with that, because such situation undermines the intergovernmental nature of UNESCO as a special body of the UN system. And we will continue to pose all the questions to the Secretariat and Audrey Azoulay personally, and we'll make sure that we'll get substantive responses from them. The document of USAID, US Agency for International Development, speaks about it a lot. There is liberal regimes, liberal dictatorships allocated money for NGOs. NGOs collected some information and provided it to the intergovernmental and international organizations, they referred to information provided by the so-called civil society, provided biased information. The countries of the West are paying for such statements or for the lack of such statements. Director General is pandering to the Kiev regime and Western patrons, and her behavior has become a disgrace. She won't be able to keep silence anymore because her inactions leads to further killings of journalists. Together with like-minded countries, we'll make sure that the Director General will deliver on her mandate. And we have hopes with the upcoming changes in the leadership of the UNESCO Secretariat. As you know, elections of the new Director General will be organized in November. And we hope that what Azule has turned UNESCO in will become a lesson for many candidates, and they won't repeat her mistakes. Thank you, Ms. Zakharova. We have another question for you. Speaker of the Armenian Parliament, Alen Simanyan, stated that Yerevan cannot constantly have tensions in its relations with Russia. Earlier, the Armenian newspaper Graparak stated that the head of the Armenian government, Nikol Pashinyan, instructed to develop closer relations with Russia. Are there any signs that there is a thaw in relations between Russia and Armenia? And earlier I have explained and provided the details of the Russia-Armenia bilateral relations. In some aspects, we have to bring our relations to a new level. Certain steps should be taken. Dialogue should be constructive and meaningful. It shouldn't be nuanced. It should be about feelings or senses. We had amazing relations with Armenia. In the historical context, nothing other could have developed to take into account the history of our relations. We are developing humanitarian contexts that are not artificial, but rather natural. Given the geography, given the history, we are destined to develop relations with Armenia. Yes, there will be those who won't welcome the development of relations between Russia and Armenia, but our position is determined by the doctrine documents, by the Russian president, and it is aimed at the full-fledged development of relations with Armenia and with the people of Armenia. Thank you, Ms. Zakharova. Thank you. Izvestia, please. Oh, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Is Vestia finished already? After E, please. I'm sorry, Ms. Zakharova. Izvestia didn't speak yet. We had two questions for you, if you allow. And they sound similar to what our colleague said and to what you said earlier, but if you allow, we would like to go back to them. Our war correspondent, Alexander Fedorchak, together with other colleagues, was killed on duty. At the same time, he observed all international requirements that journalists should observe on the battlefield. Is it possible from the diplomatic point of view to get universal, global recognition that the journalists were killed as a result of an act of terrorism launched by the Kiev regime? I believe that our law enforcement agencies should have their say and to carry out investigation. That's what they are doing, taking into account the statement made by the relevant structures. they should make a conclusion because they are qualified to do so, and they should qualify these actions. These are terrorist acts per se, but after the law enforcement agencies carry out their work, they will provide the legal qualifications for that. As for international organizations, you understand that the situation in the recent years has shown that what a whole range of countries has been expressing their principles position. It wasn't their principles position. It was actually an attempt to obstruct the making of agreements in many other tracks. And when it came to real human rights and real freedom of speech and safety of journalists, they all became silent. And that's how it affects secretariats of many international organizations.
So we should seek the reaction of international structures, but we should not think that it is them who will implement this in good faith or based on some morale. It's lacking there with unfriendly countries, with unfriendly regimes. Those regimes, they have no conscience, no morale. And the functionaries of secretariats, international organizations representing those unfriendly regimes, having their nationality or just supporting their policy, we should make them work. Just to wait until their conscience wake up. It's not necessary, I think, because we need to do our best in order to make them perform their duties. And the time of that idealistical perception of international structures where they are obliged, according to their mandate, to do that themselves without any obligation, it does not work that way for a whole number of reasons. We have mentioned them repeatedly. Yes, that should be the case, but there is the reality. It's not the case, actually, so we should strengthen our work. So if you allow me, let us return to the issue of Russian-American talks. Based on your recent experience with the American delegation, can we talk about the new level in those negotiations? So let us just not give some emotional assessments, additional assessments. Just let us assess every concrete steps. There were contacts in negotiations in Riyadh. We have discussed them in detail, what was planned, what was actually done, what we can qualify as positive, what remains to be done, but to be talking about some quality assessments of bilateral relations, it's the prerogative of the head of the state. Thank you very much. Is Author I with us? Yes, hello, Ruslan Perkratov, Author I. Hello from Kaliningrad. Today we are with you. We have a question about the Federal Republic of Germany. Their Ministry of Internal Affairs, according to some data, started to recruit mercenaries from Afghan migrants who have committed a military crime, and they have little choice either to be subject to punishment in Germany and then be deported to Afghanistan as a guarantee, or to sign a contract and to become part of the International Legion of the Territory Defense in Ukraine. According to some data, there are more than 2,000 people like that. Our question is as follows. Do you think that Germany here directly violates the International Convention against the Recruitment, Use, Financing and Training of Mercenaries, adopted by the UN General Assembly Resolution 44/34 of the 4th of December 1989. It was rather not a question, but some declaration from you, some statement. I would like to deal with the checked information. Of course, you can work with any information in asking your questions, but we need some data that has been confirmed. So I would refrain from any conclusions of this account and take some time in order to check thoroughly. The second part of this question, I would like to say that Germany is a part of all the universal treaties in international humanitarian law, and in particular to be guided by the clauses on mercenarism that are contained in Geneva Convention of 1949. And Germany has also signed but not ratified the International Convention against Recruitment, Use, Financing and Training of Mercenaries of 1989. So I would like to highlight that mercenaries are not legal participants in hostilities and do not fall within the scope of the 1949 Geneva Convention. So they are guilty not only of violating international law, national legislation, but they are responsible with the families of those people who are sent to support the neo-Nazi Kiev regime. They have just two options. The first one, to go to jail. The second one is to be killed. Of course, there is also the third option, to change their mind and not to go there. Thank you. Thank you. Is Anadolu with us? Yes, hello, my name is Zakharova. Am I audible? Yes. Our question, US President Donald Trump recently at a press conference said that Russia and Ukraine, quote, will meet on a ceasefire in the Black Sea and other countries will be involved in the process of monitoring the ceasefire. When and at what level is such a meeting planned and which countries were they talking about? I think it's better to ask the American side. He was talking about the outcome of the meeting in Riyadh that the Russian side has also commented. I have already mentioned that about the third countries and the work to be done, our experts, delegations, groups, to continue those contacts. That is meant there. Thank you. Thank you. Is Lenta daughter, are you with us? Yes, hello, my name is Zakharova. Colleagues, I have the following question. The Russian delegation in Riyadh said that Russian-American talks will continue and also the UN will participate there and other countries. So could you name those countries? It's not just some guesses. It's about the outcome of the agreements that will be reached. The meeting has just finished. They have returned from Riyadh. Assessment has been provided for the results. The work will be continued and we will share the results with you. It's not about some guesses. Thank you. Is Belarus Info with us? Belarus Info. Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Yes, Belarus Info. We have also question about Riyadh meeting. Sergei Lavrov just yesterday commented on the Black Sea initiative. He mentioned the previous initiative that has been disrupted, made some quotations. What is the assessment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the figure of Zelensky? How legitimate is he to reach some agreements? Because now the US is the mediator and separately negotiates with Ukraine and with Russia. And if Zelensky is illegitimate, With whom can Russia negotiate on the Ukrainian side, or is it only the US at this stage? And what guarantees can be provided for the implementation of this initiative? And on what can be based in order to trust Ukraine? So I haven't misheard, I think, because it's just some repetition. Because you quote Mr. Lavrov interview where he just spoke about that. He said, it was a quotation, that Zelensky, he's just feeling his end. So your question is, how legitimate is he? Whether he can be trusted? I think you can just write a scientific work about his legitimacy. The problems of the legitimacy is just mentioned in Ukraine itself. Just inventing some new aspects. How to keep this construction afloat. The replies to these questions about doubts about the legitimacy, they have been provided at all levels. There is no trust here, no trust at all, because they just lie about literally everything, even about what has been agreed upon with those who have sponsored them for all those years. Now I have just provided a lot of information how Zelensky lied even about statements by Hollande and Merkel that they were not going to implement the Minsk agreements, and now he's just talking about being deceived by Russia after the Minsk agreements. So what trust do you mean? I would draw your attention to Minister Lavrov regularly addressing this issue and repeatedly highlights that it's not about trust, not about faith or hope in something, not being deceived, but about strong guarantees that will be accepted by our country. I will just be returning to this issue, but you also read this, you see this. We have not changed this position in any way. We are conducting the work. With whom and how, you see that, I think. These are the issues to be resolved. And the last part of the question, could you repeat that? Yes. So the initiative is concluded, and Russia takes responsibility for its implementation. Which initiative? The Black Sea Initiative? So on the side of Ukraine, what are we to be based on in order to trust regarding the implementation? I would return you to the statement by Sergei Lavrov, talking that the handlers in Washington should do their part of the work to handle that monster the previous administration has nurtured. He's just said that in his interview. So now we can just conduct negotiations with the US, not with the Ukrainian side. Yes, Russia has contacts with the American delegation, with American representatives, because Zelensky has just forbidden to conduct negotiations with our country, forbidden to himself. And not everyone survived after the negotiations that took place. The Kiev regime was exterminating those negotiations from its side. So we cannot unblock that ban on conducting the negotiations. It has no solution now. They have blocked that opportunity for themselves. Thank you, Madam Zakharova, for your detailed reply. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Thank you for such a possibility to ask a question. How can you comment on the conduction in Bucharest of the Black Sea Forum with calls for war against Russia and its destruction. It's not really a meeting, it's some gathering and organized by non-governmental organizations controlled by special services and as well as Ukrainian special services who are controlled by the West. So we just see the nature of those NGOs. On the other hand, this meeting is very interesting. That hysteria that was there is just reflects the desperation of some circles against the background of the obvious defeat of the Kiev regime. And Romania providing a platform to those aggressive structures, undermining the territorial integrity of our country. And Romanian officials just participating there is just a provocative episode, anti-Russia campaign guided by the EU and conducted by Bucharest. On one hand, the Romanian authorities talk about peace and stability in the region. On the other hand, they just give the country to those who turn it into an instrument of turning into an instrument of an international tension. It has nothing to do with national sovereignty. In the Romanian society itself, it's critically assessed. So the conclusion, why a significant part of the Romanian society is more and more decisive about their opinion about the correction of the political line. It's more and more clear. Thank you. Is Newsfront with us? Yes, one question connected with international structures and their reaction on the Ukrainian regime crimes. Was there an official OSCE reaction on the Ukrainian drone attack on Moscow after OSCE Secretary General Feridun Siniroglu came to Moscow and witnessed the consequences of the attack? If there was a reaction, what was that? And if not, how can you explain its absence? Yes, there was a reaction on the outcome of the talks with Minister Lavrov on the 11th of March. It was a joint press conference with the OSCE Secretary General. Is Vesnik Kavkaza with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Armenian Parliament Speaker Mr. Simonan said that Yerevan does not plan to return to trilateral format Russia, Azerbaijan and Armenia to unblock communication. This topic was discussed during a telephone conversation between Sergei Lavrov and Erat Mirzayan. How does Russia plan to further work in resolving this issue of unblocking communication? So I would remind that the leaders of our three countries, they assigned this issue to deputy prime ministers in charge. In Armenia, this issue is handled by not by the political figure you mentioned, but by another person. So you need to address Yerevan whether they have been changed in the implementation of this issue. If not, you need to address the person in charge of this issue. You know, I do not want to comment on a specific statement by a specific person. It's just not his scope. It's assessment and request by the Armenian leadership, and the resolution of this task trilaterally reached during the period between 2020 and 2022 was the creation of a specialized trilateral working group on unblocking transport and economic ties in the South Caucasus. It was about the restoration of technical parameters, transport route between Armenia and Azerbaijan on the basis of principles of reciprocity and sovereignty. We see the destructive influence of Western countries. We also see the position of the Armenian authorities sometimes, and in many cases, it just causes questions. And those two factors, cooperation within the group, it's stalled. We have repeatedly commented on that, and the resumption of full-fledged cooperation in the mentioned trilateral group, it will contribute to the restoration of South Caucasus transport system, to feed it into larger scale schemes for transporting cargoes from Europe to Asia and back, and ensure the further social economic development of both Armenia and the region as a whole. Thank you.
If the positions of the official Yerevan changed, that it's up to them, and it would be right for them to declare the level necessary for that. Is Virelk with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I would like to continue talking about Mr. Simonyan. On March 25th, while talking to journalists, he mentioned the CSTO and the position of Armenia and relations with Russia in general. I would like for you to comment on this. And what can I comment on? Probably it would be better for official Yerevan to comment on this and to separate what's the official statement and what's his personal opinion. When the official Yerevan comments on it, we'll understand what we're dealing with the personal position, with political position, or with the official state policy. He said he talked that it was an official policy and the approach hasn't changed. But from what moment you see, you are giggling at this, so there's no use commenting on this. Then I have a question to Madam Zakharova. The Parliament of Armenia adopted in its first and the final reading a bill allowing Armenia to join the EU. What's your opinion? The opinion was expressed many times at various levels. If I put it briefly to remind you, because the representatives of the administration of the president talked about it in greater detail, and those in charge in this direction, Vice President Mr. Ovechuk, he gave explanations with facts, figures, and so on. But briefly, the EU membership and Eurasian Economic Union cannot overlap. It's up to a person, but these things in terms of agreements made in these associations, they are unfortunately contradicting and not overlapping. Thank you. Thanks to you. Let's move on. Is Tabria TV company with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have a question about negotiations in Riyadh. The Ukrainian delegation to negotiations with the US again arrived in military uniform, both in Russia and in Ukraine, it was called a circus. We have a question. Are there any rules of dress code for such cases, probably unspoken ones, and why does the Kiev region behave like this? You know, usually when you receive an invitation for an official event by some country, an official dinner or ceremony, when one country invites diplomats or delegations for an event, dress code is mentioned. When we're talking about negotiation process, some things are go without speaking, and for additional events, there's a mark concerning dress code. It mentions the type of clothes expected to be worn. There are unified understandings in protocol. There is certain common understanding of how it works. And this dress code mentioned also provides for the ability for a person to dress into the national costume. I have an impression that the Kiev regime, this militarized uniform, it's not a military uniform. In many cases, those are just variations of military uniform. It's kind of a game. And what we see is not a military uniform indeed, or sometimes civilians wear military uniform who have nothing to do with the military service. And the Kiev regime see it as a part not of a national dress code, not a national costume, but a symbolism of their own sect that they created. I have an impression that it will go down in history like this, that the Kiev regime worked out a specialized system of symbols, and one of them is a militarized uniform. Thank you very much, Madam Zakharova. Thanks to you. Is Русский вектор стратегического назначения with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. I have two questions. Question one. Journalists of Zvezda TV channel and Zvest media outlet were killed by the American HIMARS MLRS, and Banza back in 2022 said the HIMARS targeting is enabled by the American military satellites. Will the Russian MFA go into send a note of protest to the US government? We say at all levels that Western supplies lead to killings of civilians. The Western supplies, I don't have information in which year these arms were supplied, but I have an impression that majority of this armaments were supplied by the US. I don't think that public statements are not weaker in this regard. But there's a question to the American public society why they keep silence, why they care so much about nuances, what happened 100 years ago, who's looked at somebody else, and why some almost irrelevant tweet or message in the social network with a photo can become a reason to wipe out a person from the media sphere, and supplies of armaments by regimes and people in the USA do not cause the American public and NGOs a certain response. One of the questions I mentioned today, the NGOs and the American public was paid by the US aid, and the country administration closed this down, and the new public hasn't been shaped, who work not for money but because they want to become guarantors and care about human rights. Question 2. Russia is going to be a threat for the interests of the US in long term, according to the American reconnaissance. Sergei Lavrov, while commenting on negotiations in Riyadh, said that peace guarantees can come solely as a result of an order to Zelensky from Washington. You called on not to wait breakthroughs from negotiations between Russia and the US. 150 civilians were affected over the last week, and the information space speaks about hybrid information, proxy war. In reality, there's a real war between the US and Russia. Probably Commander-in-Chief should have all the authority given this. And what is the question? What was that? The question, let's call a spade a spade. We have a hot war without, we call it a hybrid war. Are you confused with this name, with this word? Hybrid, you say hybrid? I just don't understand your question. Look, we ask such a question because all the country demands extraordinary authority to President Putin. So please address your question to administration of President. Thank you. Thanks to you. Is Tverskaya 13 with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We had 2 questions, but you answered them in great detail. Thanks to you. So we don't have questions. Is the compatriots journal together with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. A tragic event, the killing of our journalist, caused wide response and concerned many. For example, International Movement of Russophiles responded and said and expressed its position in a declaration. They say that it is unacceptable to strike civilians. It violates international law. The movement of Russophiles made open statements. We are outraged that no Western media officially responded and condemned this terror attack against Russian media representatives. Question to you, are there any more international organizations, public organizations that condemned this crime of the Kiev regime? I can say that we're grateful for everyone who responded. There are a lot of people who responded. From I saw one of the first statements from our Belarus colleagues. Thank you for your solidarity. I saw other responses, and I think that we're going to prepare a list of these statements. We believe that in this case, it's a point of no return. Those more relevant NGOs who deal in the international contacts of freedom of speech and freedom of journalists do not condemn the killings of Russian journalists won't have the right to talk about it anymore. This is the point of no return. The international organization, we will demand from the international organizations, because they live off taxpayers from various countries, and it's their work for them, for these organizations, and we will demand them to fulfill this work. As to the NGOs, what can we demand from them? It's an issue whether we consider them seriously or not. And every time when they say about the responsibilities, will say that they cannot act. If there are no questions, then goodbye. Thank you. Известия journalist Alexander Fedorchak detailed information about crimes of the Banderovics is collected and structured by the International Public Tribunal. Journalists and their camera crews, how they hit them from all possible types of armaments supplied by the West cannot be described. In recent days, following targeted attacks, including through high precision, long range armaments, 4 media representatives were killed, 3 besides other civilians were severely wounded on March 24th, as you know, on the territory of the LPR, following a targeted